So once we have seen the theory of array, so we have talked about one-dimensional array, we have talked about two-dimensional array, and why we even need an array, because if you have multiple elements and you want to, instead of storing those elements into different variables, we can use one common variable where you can store all the values. So let's try to implement that in a practical scenario here. So let's say I want to create an array of integers. So I will simply say, I have to say integers int, I will use int of nums equal to, in Java, arrays are objects, so we have to use a new keyword and we'll use a int to specify the size of an array. Let's say I want an array of 4 elements. Now it is compulsory to define the size of an array, because if you miss to define the size of an array, it will give you error. Now once you say 4, the size is fixed. As soon as you write this line, so inside your JVM, you can see in your heap memory something happens in this way. So inside your heap memory, you got this box where you have these 4 boxes. So the first box will have 0. In fact, all the boxes will have 0 is because since we are creating array of int, so if you create an array like that, it will create array of int with all the values as 0. Just to prove my point, what I will do is I will print the values. So if I want to print the values, I will simply say system.out.println, let me pick up any value. So let's say I want to pick up the third box there. The third box index number will be 2 because index number starts with 0, right? So you can see the first box is 0, then we have 1, then we have 2, then we have 3. So I want to fetch the third box, which is the 2, right? So if you write 2, you'll be getting the output, which is, see, we are getting 0. Now why 0 is because the value by default is 0. Now let's say I don't want the values to be 0, I want my own values there. So what we can do is we can specify the values individually here. So we can say nums of 0, I want to assign the value, let's say 8. Then we can say nums dot 1, we can specify 12. We can say nums of 2, we can specify 76, and any value will do here. I'm just specifying the values. So if I say 3, we'll say 54. Just to have that all numbers not in sequence. So we have 8, 12, 76 and 54. So we have all these numbers and we are fetching only 2 here. So if I fetch 2, it will of course give you 76, right? Because we are fetching the value of the second element, which is of course, third element, which is nums of 2. So we got 76. Now we can also change the value. We can change the value, right? Once you define it, we can also change it. We can say nums of 2. We can again change the value because anyway, this array is variable, right? So you can change the values of it. So as soon as you write this line, after this line, you can see the box there, it has value 8, 12, 76 and 54. But as soon as you write this line, you can see the change there. So now 76 becomes 99. And that's why when you fetch this value, it will give you 99. Simple. But what will happen if I try to print? So let's say I don't have a value at 4th location because the size of my array is 4 and I'm trying to access the 5th location now, and you can see outside the box we have nothing. So if I run this code, it will give you an array which is ArrayIndexOutOfBoundException because there is nothing after that box, right? It only has 4 elements and you're trying to fetch the 5th element here. So what if I assign a values to nums of 4 equal to 77? Will it work now? You can see if I run this code now, you can see we got the error on this line itself. On line number 13, we cannot assign the value there. Now let's say I have assigned all the values. I want to print all the values. Now to print all the values, we have to say nums of 0, then we have to say nums of 1, then we have to say nums of 2, nums of 3, right? So instead of writing 4 lines, what we can do is we can write only one line here. We can say for int I, which will start with 0 because array starts with 0 and will end at, we'll give a semicolon there, we'll say end at 4 because we have to end at 3, right? So we have to say less than 4. We don't have to specify equal to sign there. And then we can simply say nums of I. So it will print all the values. As you can see, we got 8, 12, 76 and 54. So using a for loop, we can print all the values here. In fact, in the next video, we'll also talk about enhanced for loop, which is the new, not new exactly, it is there from a long time. So we got one more way of printing the values from the array called as enhanced for loop. We'll see that later. Okay, so this is how you use a one-dimensional array. So this is 1D array. Now there's one more thing here. When you know the values predefined, when you already know the values, instead of saying new int, we can also specify the value here itself. We can say 8, 12, 76, 54. So if you know the values pre-hand, instead of creating this this thing here, we can directly assign the values. Even if I run this code now, it will give the same output. So that's how you can create an array, one-dimensional array. You can print it. In fact, we can also create the object, I mean the array of objects. Example, if I have a class here and if I have class student and I want to create in this student, I have two things. We have a roll number and we have string name. What we can do is we can create multiple objects here of student. We can say student s1 equal to new student. That's the first object I have. Again, we can specify the values there. But let's say if I create multiple objects here, if I'm creating 4 objects, this is S2, this is S3, this is S4. So if I'm creating 4 objects here, I can create, instead of that, I can create the object of students. I will say S, I will use a square bracket, then I will say new student, okay, and specify I have 4 students here. And in this S, in fact, we can, instead of writing this line, we can also specify S1, S2, S3, S4. Okay, so we are creating the array of students. So I will recommend you to do some experiment with this. You will get the exact point what I'm talking about. In fact, you can also apply a for loop here and you can do that also. So once we got the array of student, let me remove that. So this is your one-dimensional array and we have seen how to use it. In the next, we'll talk about two-dimensional arrays. Now once we know what is one-dimensional array, let's move towards two-dimensional array. So just to define that, what I will do is, so let me create an array. Let's say this array is, let's say A. So I have this A array which has certain values. So let's say I want to assign a value which is 1, 2, 3, 4. So I have this array which has 4 values, right? So instead of creating 4 variables, I'm using one array. Now let's say we have one more array which is B, and the values of B is 2, 4, 6, 8. And then we have one more array here which is C, which has, let's say, 5, 6, 7, 8. So these are the values I have. So I have 3 arrays and we have 4 values in each. See, instead of creating 4 variables, I have created one array, right? So instead of creating 3 arrays, can I create one big array? We can do that. So you can see we can create an array. We'll name this as D. Now this D is a two-dimensional array because this is an array which will not have simple values. So D itself will have small arrays. So D will have A, B, C. And the values of A is not just A, it is, so that's your first array. Then in the second array what we have is, and the next array which you have here will have values which is 5, 6, 7, 8, right? So we got this two-dimensional array which has array, which itself has an array. Okay, so now what if I say system.out.println D of 0. So when I say D of 0, it is representing the whole array here. Okay, so D of 0, that means the first row. So you can imagine this thing as a row and column. So this is first row, second row, third row, and then we got columns. So we got 1, 2, 5, 2, 4, 6, these are columns. So if I say D of 0, it is the whole row, right? So I don't want the whole row, I want the second element from the first row. So I can specify the second element as 1. So first row, second column, so we have to specify 0, 1. And if I run this code, you get the output as 2. Okay, that's the way. If you want to print all the elements, what we can do is we can use a for loop. And now this for loop, so the outer for loop will use this for loop for the number of rows, to count the number of rows, semicolon less than, we have 3 rows, right? So we'll use 3 and we'll say I plus plus. So this define the number of rows, and we require one more for loop there which is int j equal to 0 and j less than equal to not equal to, let's say I have 4, and then j plus plus. So the inner loop will be counting the number of columns. So this loop will count the number of rows and this loop will count the number of columns. And now if I want to print, so I will not use println, I will only use print to specify the particular form. Because if I use println, what will happen is, if I specify D of I and j, which will change in some time, if you run this code and if you run this, you can see we are getting all this output here. I don't want output in a linear format. So what I want is, here it should print only in the same line with some space, of course. And after this inner for loop, we can print a new line so that we can get the perfect structure. So you can see we got we got the same blocks here, right? Now, how exactly is working? Just let's run through a loop. So you can see this image, we have an array there. So in this array, in this box, I mean we have a square box where you have 3 rows and 4 columns. So all the values by default are, I mean we have all the values there, 1, 2, 3, 4, then all these values. So initially when you have I and j, so I value will be 0 and j value will be 0. So it will point to the first box, which is 1. So it will fetch the value as 1. Then the loop increments, your j becomes 2, I mean j becomes 1. So it is fetching 0, 1, which is the first row second element, which is 2. And then your j becomes 2, it will fetch 3. Your j becomes 3, it will fetch 4. Now once you are fetching 4, you can say we don't have any element after that. It will jump to the second row. So when you say you're jumping to second row, that means your I value now becomes 1. And then we can, again your j value becomes 0, so you're fetching 2, then j increments, it fetch 4, and then 6, and then 8. So that's how it will fetch all the values from 2-dimensional array. So in 2-dimensional array, we can have the arrays of same size. Now what if I change the size? What if I say this is 6? Okay, I'm not sure. I mean, in the first row I have 4 elements, in the second row I have 3 elements, in the third row, let's say I have 5 elements. Now in this scenario, since the number of columns are not fixed, we cannot say 4 here, right? Because the number of rows are fixed, so we can say 3. We cannot say 4 here. So what we'll do, I will say d of I mean for that particular row. So if I say d of I, so it will be either this row or that row depending upon the I value. I want to fetch the length of that row. And instead of 3 here, we can also say d dot length. So it will give the number of rows to you. So it will give number of rows, I mean the number of arrays you have. First array, second array, third array. So it will give you 3. And here, depend upon on which array you are working with. Or if you are working with the first array, when your I value is 0, it will return 4. If your I value is 1, it will return 3. When your I value is 3, it will return 5. And if I run this code, you can see this, you got this type of output. So this type of array where the number of columns are not fixed are normally called jagged arrays. So if you have all the columns as same, that means it is normal 2D array. But if you have different size of the column, that will be your jagged arrays. So the only precaution you have to take is this precaution here. Okay, so that's it. That's how you use 2-dimensional array and jagged array. In the next video, we'll talk about enhanced for loop. So that's it. Thank you so much.